We're delighted that you could join us tonight for a double book launch by two of our local sources of tremendous pride for our community, both on Maimonides, both on the Rambam. And we felt it's especially appropriate to do it tonight because tonight is the 810th word site of the Rambam. So we hope that our discussions and our study tonight will bring special merits to our community and to the Rambam as well. In order to be able to frame the evening for you this evening, we've asked our dear friend, Dr. Kenneth Green, professor of the Department of the Study of Religion at the University of Toronto, to be able to provide an introduction before we bring up our two authors, Dr. Diamond and Dr. Friedberg. Before I do that, I'd like to extend great thanks to a number of different people who were instrumental in making sure this evening could happen tonight. First of all, I'd like to thank David and David Diamond for the refreshments this evening. I'd like to thank our three scholars, Dr. Green, Dr. Friedberg, and Dr. Diamond, for agreeing to be here this evening and to promote the study of the Rambam. I'd like to thank my dear friend and Mechutin, Rami Rutman, who brokered the acquisition of our two scholars, Dr. Diamond and Dr. Friedberg, for tonight. And I'd like to thank KosherTube, which is filming this symposium this evening and which will be posting this on the KosherTube website. For those of you who have availed yourself of KosherTube in the past, koshertube.com, you know that it is a tremendous repository for literally thousands upon thousands of classes in Shiurim that take place both locally here in the GTA as well as many other locations throughout the world. KosherTube is preparing to launch KosherTube 2.0, which will have many, many more features, so please stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we're very grateful to Rabbi Ostreicher and the KosherTube team for filming this evening. I'd like to call upon Dr. Kenneth Green to give us an introduction for the Rambam at this time. We were very proud to be able to do a book launch last year on two of Dr. Green's newest books on Leo Strauss and Maimonides. So this is a person who's no stranger to the Rambam, and it's a special honor to be able to ask him to give the introduction this evening. Dr. Green.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Prof, for those kind words. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you tonight the speakers, or at least to set the stage for their talks, Dr. Diamond and Dr. Friedberg. And as it happens, Jim is an old friend. We were close partners for many years in the study group. We learned Rambam more when we came together. And Dov, I know for many years from his association with the University of Toronto. So these are both friends. And curiously, they're both members of the Toronto Orthodox community. And I think that's kind of an interesting fact. I'm not going to name names, but I think it's fair to say that the Orthodox community in Toronto is unusually well represented in the modern scholarly study of the Rambam, and has been for many years. Now, for traditional Jews, Rambam has always been at the center of the curriculum, primarily the Mishnah Torah, but also much else in his oeuvre. But the fact is that in contemporary modern Jewish studies, interest in the Rambam has been a major focus. In fact, I think it's fair to say that it's a never-ending source of new books, which flow out like a continuous stream, and also articles, reviews, internet discussions. So the question that I think we should ask is, why? What is it about Maimonides that makes him so endlessly fascinating to so many people, Orthodox, non-Orthodox, non-Jewish? And I hope that we'll at least get an inkling of an answer from our two speakers tonight. I mean, I spoke last year, as I mentioned, on why Maimonides matters, and another opportunity I had in the shul, I spoke about why Maimonides is controversial, and the fact is that he's always been both. He's always mattered and he's always been controversial. And why that should be, of course, would take us off a long discussion, but I think that it's interesting and it's important to recognize how relevant he is in the 21st century, or for the 58th century. Both academic and traditional scholars have agreed on this. And in fact, Israel Tversky, professor in Rebbe, once made the statement that most of Jewish intellectual history in the last 800 years has been a long debate for and against the Rambam, for and against his position, and I mean he puts it slightly differently. He puts it in terms of the wisdom and advisability of Maimonides' position, and I think at least that's some of the beginning of the understanding what that position is. I think we'll try to do that tonight, but that judgment reflects something of the reason why he's so interesting. Now let me say something about what I think will come out of the discussion tonight. It's kind of a guess or a suggestion about both Professor Diamond and Dr. Friedberg's books, and I think it has to do with a characteristic of Maimonides which, especially in the 20th century, has been emphasized. And I would say that this is as true whether one begins from the point of view of Leo Strauss or begins from the position of Israel Tversky. And that is, to put it into a single word, the creativity of Maimonides. Contrary to our image of him, which we sometimes hold as a kind of eminence grise, as a kind of gray figure behind a kind of bland traditionalism, in fact, everything about the Rambam speaks an independent mind who thought for himself and who, when we look back at him in terms of, let's say, medieval encumbrances, he has surprisingly few. He is an independent-minded original who made historic changes to Judaism, both obvious and subtle. And though, of course, he always kept fidelity with tradition and law, Rambam saw many opportunities for altering the law and the tradition in the direction which he wanted it to open up. Which is what? Well, I guess one could say in a sort of greater enlightenment, a greater raising of the level of mindfulness of the whole Jewish community. Certainly for a few for whom he had great hopes, but also for the many, for the whole people. He wanted to change the way Jews live and think. And he did that subtly through the Jewish law. And I'm guessing, and I'm not here, I'm not authorized by either of the speakers, and it's certainly not my name to speak, so I'm going to finish in a minute, but I think that one of the things we may learn from both Dr. Friedberg and Professor Diamond is that in their books he was a creative thinker in putting together something like the 630 Commandments, which might seem to be, to some people, kind of straightforward thing. You just list them, right? That's it. Well, it's not quite so simple. And similarly, when we talk about the impact that he made, which I think Jim will talk about, one talks about a creative figure whose creativity reverberated down through the generations and the centuries, so that Jewish history really would be unintelligible today without thinking about the Rambam. But that's my guess, and that's all I want to say. As I say, it's not my evening to speak, so I will turn the podium over to Rabbi Grobkin, who will now make a formal introduction, I think, of Dr. Friedberg and Professor Diamond.
Thank you so much, Dr. Green, and we're looking forward to your next book. The way the format of the evening is going to work is you see three very comfortable armchairs here. We're going to call up our two authors in just a moment. One will sit to my right and one will sit to the left. Please do not construe any political or religious undertones to those positions. We're going to ask each of the authors to spend a few minutes describing what their book is about. And then I'll ask a few questions. And then when that's finished, we'll open up the floor and we'll pass one of our cordless microphones to the audience. And we'll ask people to ask whatever questions that they have. I'd like to also note that at some point in the evening, there will be a selection of books available. Both Dr. Friedberg and Dr. Diamond have brought their books tonight, although Dr. Diamond only has a small number of the newest book because in its hardcover incarnation, it's a little bit pricey. So, and the author, of course, doesn't set the price, so there's not much we can do about that. But the books are for sale, and you can see one of the ladies at the table for the purchase of the books. So if I could please ask Dr. Friedberg and Dr. Diamond to please come forward. And I'll give you a very brief, can everyone hear me? I'll give you a very brief bio of each author. James A. Diamond holds an endowed chair in Jewish Studies at the University of Waterloo. He's a leading authority on medieval Jewish thought and philosophy. His previous two books each garnered the Canadian Jewish Book Award for Best Scholarly Book in the field of Jewish Studies. His last book, entitled Maimonides and the Outsider, was chosen in 2008 as a notable selection by the Jordan Schnitzer Book Awards in the category of philosophy and Jewish thought for best book in the previous 4 years. And of course, the book that he's going to be speaking about tonight is just newly published in the last couple of months, called Maimonides and the Shaping of the Jewish Canon. Alberto Friedberg was born in Lyon, France in 1946 and was raised in Uruguay, South America. He has a BA degree in economics from Johns Hopkins, an MBA degree in international banking from Columbia, and a PhD degree in Near Eastern and Middle Eastern civilizations from the University of Toronto. Albert Friedberg is principal shareholder of Friedberg Mercantile Group Limited, a Toronto-based investment firm. From 1971 until 2004, he wrote and published a monthly analysis of world economic trends, investment strategies, and policy entitled Friedberg's Commodity and Currency Comments. He was appointed by the Premier of the Province of Ontario as one of 5 members of the Commodity Futures Advisory Board of Ontario and served as chairman of the Toronto Futures Exchange for 3 terms. All, of course, qualified to be a Maimonides scholar. He has published in a number of academic journals, primarily on Bible, Jewish medieval theology, and exegesis and rabbinics. His 2 most recent articles are The Explanatory Commandments, Ramban's daring and creative contribution to the Parshanut of the Book of Deuteronomy, published in Chakira, and Maimonides on Anthropomorphism, published in a festschrift honoring Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb. Gentlemen, it's an honor and a privilege to have you here before us, and I don't know who to ask to go first, so I'll leave it up to one of you to decide. Okay.
Thanks very much for coming. It gives me a lot of benefits to see, and just credit to our community that people here are actually interested in thought, in Jewish thought. I've never seen really, I've addressed a lot of crowds, and I've never seen a crowd this big. So it's a credit to our community, and I'd like to thank, it's a credit to the rabbi here in the row of debate, Rabbi Korobkin, who brings, I think, fresh air to the shul, and I'd like to thank him and everybody who was involved in organizing this event. Just a little background to my book. Obviously, the rabbi graciously said that I have enough time to read 6 chapters of it. I'm kidding. But just to give you a general idea of where this book comes from. So this book that I have written now, that recently came out, called Maimonides and the Shaping of the Jewish Canon, is not strictly speaking about Maimonides. I have 2 previous books. One called Maimonides and the Hermeneutics of Concealment, and I'll never put a word in a title that people don't understand, including myself. I learned a lesson there, but and my second book was Converts, Heretics, and Lepers, Maimonides and the Outsider, which both books dealt with very close readings of Maimonides, particularly on the guide, the perplexed, and his philosophical work, but also trying to show, as Professor Isidore Twersky, Alav Shalom, argued, that there is a symbiotic relationship between both Rabbi Maimonides, for instance, the Rambam, Moshe ben Maimon, and Maimonides. Maimonides, that they're not two separate people. It wasn't schizophrenic. And there are problems, there's no question about it, in reading the halachic Rambam and the philosophic Rambam together, but they go together. So my previous two books kind of dealt with that. This book came out of a lot of time thinking about the influence that Maimonides, that the Rambam has had. And during all my reading, many years of reading all kinds of texts from all kinds of periods, I realized that he looms fairly large. This may not come as a surprise, but he looms very large and is always in the shadow of virtually, I would say, all of Jewish thought. Any thinker, any Jewish thinker, be it in rabbinics or be it in philosophy, no matter what he's writing about, the Rambam has set the agenda. In the Middle Ages, we're talking here about a person who was born in 1138 and died in 1204, and the people writing in the 20th century or the 21st century are still thinking about him, still either endorsing him, and there's three ways this works, three main ways, is either through endorsement of the Rambam, that is, they agree with his approach, they agree with his ideas, vigorous opposition, which started almost immediately, actually during his lifetime and afterwards, huge controversy, or, which I find quite interesting, rereading. That is, rereading the Rambam to make him say what you presently want him to say. Basically, that's an important topic. That is, though I dealt previously with, the Rambam's texts, picking away at various positions of his that come out of his text, this I thought was an important topic. So I chose 8 or 9 different thinkers, all the way back to the Rambam, actually starting with the Rambam himself. And the way I started with the chapter on the Rambam is Maimonides on Maimonides. That is, Maimonides kind of engaging his own work, because we know that he constantly rethought his own work, constantly revised his own work, which does away with a lot of forests that have been cut down on his work, kind of the old, when I was in yeshiva, entering a Shver Rambam, often it's just a matter of, he might have changed his mind, or a matter of maybe a different text, where he himself says that you have the wrong text. It's not a problem. But starting with the Rambam, and then of course going to who I think is the other, I would say without a doubt, the other major medieval intellect, the Ramban, Maimonides, who lived a bit after the Rambam, but who could not be different than the Rambam in his theology, in his view of virtually every single tenet that we would associate with Judaism. The Ramban opposed the Rambam with great reverence, but opposed them. But I would say even more, what I tried to do in my book is that often in thinkers' opposition, their very opposition is fueled by the Rambam's positions. That is, without the Rambam's position in opposition, they may very well never have fully fleshed out their own positions. He actually, for instance, another chapter in my book deals with a very, very prominent Kabbalist. Many people don't know about him, but according to Gershon Sholem, a person called Meir Ibn Gabbai in the 15th century, Gershon Sholem, who was a great scholar of Jewish mysticism, called him the greatest Jewish encyclopedist of Kabbalah pre-Luria. That is, pre-Isaac Luria, who kind of introduced a lot of revolutionary new ideas in Kabbalah. He was the greatest encyclopedist. The way he structures his great work, Avodat HaKodesh, is precisely a counterpoint to everything the Rambam did in his Guide of the Perplexed. So that he fashions it as, for instance, the Rambam develops a whole way of reading the Bible. I once wrote that you can call the Guide of the Perplexed another title, How to Read the Bible. Because what he does is to offer you in the first section of the guide, and really everywhere, a dictionary. Really, he gives you a dictionary on how to read the Bible. Here are all the terms, right, that I consider problematic. When you sit down with the Chumash or Tanakh, I want you to take this dictionary, and when you encounter a word that is problematic from a philosophical point of view, from a theological point of view, take my chapter devoted to that word, read that text, and you'll figure out what it means. So something like an innocuous word like sit, right? Or see, or stand. These words are very problematic for the Rambam when they refer to God, because he doesn't like words that imply that God has any kind of physical characteristics. So he hands you a lexicon, dictionary by which you can read. If Meir Gabai, a number of centuries later, feels it important enough to actually turn it on its head and give you a counter-lexicon, the same words, right, but infusing them, re-infusing them with the anthropomorphisms that the Rambam tried to drain it of, re-infusing them with the metaphysics and the theology that was totally opposite, totally opposed to what the Rambam tried to do. But at the same time, what the Rambam did was to actually fuel the very thing that he was probably fighting against, though we didn't really know of the Zohar, despite what many people try to say, in a very interesting way. Without the Rambam, Kabbalah, as we know it, also could not have developed. The rationalist Rambam, who probably would hate, viscerally hate, with every bone in his body, very many of the concepts, theological concepts that Kabbalah has introduced, is responsible himself for giving them their language, giving them what to work for, and in almost a negative way, informing the whole mystical enterprise. So, again, just to mention a few, I took him, I took Maimonides, I took the Ritva, Ben Avram Ishvili, who actually was in the Nachmanidean camp and defended the Rambam against the Nachmanidean critiques. Anybody who's read the Ramban's Pirush knows that the Rambam is a target, not, I would say, the most prominent target. I think the most prominent target is Rashi. People don't talk about it, but that's what I think. I think the Rambam is the opponent he really wants to meet very seriously and head-on, almost offering, I'll say something maybe a little bit controversial here, but I actually believe this. That is, that when you hear the old cliche that we all serve the same God, not only is that not true about different religions, we certainly see that going on. It's not true at all. It's a cliche that is simply false and is dangerous. But it's not even true about Jews. That is, I would say, maybe this is kind of a general discussion, that the Ramban and the Rambam served different gods. That is, their conceptions of God were so different, that they literally worshiped different gods. So I'll leave that for questions later. But the Maimonides felt it important enough to take him on. And so it is, and I'm not going to spend too much more time, a few more minutes, just to mention some of the figures that I go through. So I go through Meir Gabai, then I take the arch-heretic known to Judaism, Spinoza, who in his very abandonment of Judaism, of everything that Judaism stands for, theologically, philosophically, feels it important enough to devote probably a lot of his major work, the theological political treatise, combating the Rambam. The Rambam is his target, but he uses his argument is done from within the tradition, and that's what I argue in the book. And then I move on to people like in the 20th century, the Netziv, Berlin, who not a lot has been written about, especially in the scholarly world. There's one book that came out recently, who feels in the 20th century that the Rambam is still there and needs to be taken on. And then I finally end with Rav Kook. Everybody knows Rav Kook, but for those who don't, was the first kind of chief rabbi of Palestine at the time in pre-State of Israel. Was himself a kind of a Kabbalist. Kept all his works can be looked at as kind of a mystical diary. And what he does is that other option. Rather than straight opposition, rather than endorsement, he rereads the Rambam in a kind of a mystical way. And this is the Mishnah Torah, the actual Mishnah Torah. So if I can, I'll just finish this last minute, because I had an interview recently online, and I don't think I can say it better orally than what I said here. So I'm just going to kind of read to you what I said to the question of why is Maimonides relevant today. And this may also be fodder for discussion. Firstly, it remains relevant in the sense that the Hebrew Bible does. I constantly remind my students that regardless of one's beliefs, one cannot possibly understand the history of Western thought, culture, and art without knowledge of the Bible. In the same way, from a practical, historical, and scholarly perspective, and that's what I set out in my book, one cannot possibly understand the intellectual history of Jewish thought without understanding Maimonides, whether you like him or not. Right? You can't understand. He's always there, whether it's either explicitly, implicitly, he's always looming in the background. I even end the book with Franz Kafka, who probably, I would say, never read Rambam, but even him, I think, can be better understood, read against the grain of Maimonides. But secondly, I think this should resonate, and I think maybe a reason why my friend Dov, and by the way, I just have to say that it's a pleasure for me to be up here. Ken was the first time around when I read more with him, and Dov was the second time around, third time around, I don't know, last time. But I think he would agree, and what draws us to him, what draws maybe I'm sure Ken to him, is the following. That Maimonides stands as a supreme model of a complete human being, who struggled to incorporate both his humanness and his Jewishness into a seamless whole. As such, both the world of the yeshiva and that of the academy have much to learn from his legacy. Again, the science Maimonides operated with is irrelevant. It's outdated, we know that, but it's irrelevant to an appreciation of the existential enterprise he devoted his life to. The science changes, but the dilemma, conflict, and spiritual wrestling remains the same. The reason he has and continues to wield so strong an attraction in both worlds, that is, the academic world and the yeshiva world, is because of his wholeness, of his potent combination of rabbinic expertise and philosophical acumen. Without these, Maimonides could easily have been ignored by devotees of either school, and thus would not loom large over the evolution of Jewish thought. Nor indeed be the subject of my book. For me, the problem he addresses that motivated him to compose the Guide really says it all about his continuing relevance to any modern Jew. Those who seek to remain committed to the tradition and sacred texts, but committed to their intellects, he offered us a solution that we need not abandon either. Jewishness cannot be fulfilled at the expense of turning one's back on one's intellect and living a lie, condemned to perpetually suffer from what he says, loss to oneself and harm to one's religion. Maimonides offered us the tools for avoiding a life of inauthenticity or simplicity. And I'll just end here. Religion for Maimonides, and this is what attracted me and Dov and Ken and many people, does not provide comfort, but demands extraordinary effort in understanding both the world around you and the why of God's dictates. Blind faith attracts no praise in Maimonides, except as a childish starting point for a life of sustained thought and struggle as the only authentic mode of existence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diamond. We'd now like to call upon Dr. Alberto Friedberg to introduce his new book, Crafting the 613 Commandments.
Good evening. It's always a difficult act, very difficult act to follow the articulate Jim. And maybe I should have gone first. Anyway, thank you, Rabbi Rapkin. Thank you, all of you, for coming tonight, overnight. I did expect 25 people. My wife corrected me, she said 20. I'm kind of surprised, but this obviously has to do with the interest in Rambam. I may slip from time to time from Maimonides to Rambam. Actually, I want to use Rambam, but in the scholarly world, Maimonides is used. So forgive me if I do that. I prefer Rambam anyway. So I want to talk a little bit about my book. I guess that's what I have to do. And I'm not talking to sell my book. I just want to explain the book. And the book is in two parts. The first part explores the reason that Rambam wrote the Sefer HaMitzvot, and especially the reason why he engaged in a count of mitzvahs, and this 613 count. Now, you'll find that strange. Rambam says exactly what he means. He says, why do I engage in this count? Why do I do this? And the Sefer HaMitzvot was written, he says, for simply as an introduction, as a prolegomena, we call it, an introductory essay or study to the Mishnah Torah. And he's about to write a code of law, a Mishnah Torah, and he needs an outline. And he says he needs an outline. He needs a way of remembering and making sure he doesn't omit any topic. And so he develops this Sefer HaMitzvot, a very complex work with 14 methodological rules. And he says that he, as I said before, he doesn't want to omit any topics, so he starts by saying that he wants to list all the mitzvot aseh and all the mitzvot lo aseh, all the positive and negative commandments. And then he says, well, this count has already been made in the past by other people, by other authors, but he says they engage in fantasies, absolute fantasies. They don't know what they're talking about. Their methodology is imprecise. They're wrong. Even calls them fools sometimes. And then he says, not only that, he says, but the other counters, the other people who counted it were the poets. And they created azarot, liturgical poems. And he says, they are poets and they're not rabbonim, so we can't really take them very seriously. But he says he's extremely distressed at the fact that these are widely disseminated, that these counts, these enumerations are widely disseminated. He seems to be complaining a little bit too much about it, and we'll talk about this a little bit further. But he does seem that he wants to redo the whole thing. He wants to start a new count. He wants to start with a new methodology. He, as I said, provides 14 rules on how to proceed, and these are a magnificent piece of taxonomy that Rambam creates, and there's been a tremendous amount of literature on this. Of course, the principal critic of the Rambam was the Ramban, which as you had mentioned before, and is a magnificent rebuttal almost on every part. The Hasagot of Ramban are an incredible piece of work. At any rate, and then he says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this enumeration, and he quotes the Tariach, the Agadav of the Tariach, which appears at the end of Masechet Makos. And he quotes it, and he doesn't quote it in the name of Rabbi Simai. He doesn't quote names he doesn't attribute things usually. He tries not to attribute things. And he says, Ombru, they said. And what they said is, 613 mitzvot were given to Moshe at Sinai. 613 were given to Moshe at Sinai. And 248 were mitzvot aseh, and 365 were mitzvot lo aseh, and the 248 equal the organs of the body, and the 365 equals the days of the year. And then there's a piece added to this mimer, to this dictum, and it's Rabbi Nuna. He explicates this mimer, and he says, how do we know that it's 613? And he says, well, here it is. Torah Tzivolanu Moshe. Torah is in Gematria 611. Some of you are good at Gematria, I'm not, but that's what it says, 611. And 2 were heard directly from Pihagura. 2 were heard directly from God. Which 2 were heard directly from God? Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and Lo Sielacho Elohim Acherim. There were 2 mitzvot that worked directly. So 6:11 plus 2, 6:13. That's what we have. By the way, the Tanchuma cites another tradition, and it says that, it goes a little further, and it says that 248 organs of the body are telling the person, every organ of the body tells the person to do a mitzvah with me. It's powerful. And 365 days of the year tell the person, every day do a mitzvah with me, don't transgress the prohibition. So it's, in a way, sort of like a metaphor for constancy and dedication and commitment. That's what it looks like. But Rambam actually quotes it. So now I begin my problem. And this is a reader's problem when you read this. And the first one is this. If Rambam needed a comprehensive list of topics for his Mishnah Torah, he could have done as well without getting Taryag involved. He could have just done a list. He could have listed everything that he wanted to list. He didn't have to get himself into a lot of, we'll talk later about the complications of getting exactly 613. And he could have done a list, and the list would have included topics that he actually included in the Mishnah Torah. There were other things than the biblical laws. For example, we all know that Rambam has Hilchot Chanukah and Megillat Chanukah. They're rabbinical. Or we know that he has Hilchot Eruvin, rabbinical. Or we know that he has Zechiyah Matana, rabbinical. Shiluchim Shutafim, again, rabbinical. So there's a number of rabbinical topics that are not included in the Taryag, and so the question then remains, so why use the Taryag? Why bother with the Taryag? Just do a list, plain list. So that's my number one problem. By the way, these are not, when I say problems, these are not shvele questions, like they say in Yeshiva. These are not sorachiyah. These are not really questions that you can't sleep with. These are just questions that if you aggregate them, if you put them all together, they give you a sense that there's something else going on. Okay? So when I say problems, don't think that they are impossible to answer. The second one is the constraints of finding precisely 613. We have a lot of commentators who make a lot of comments, and they actually show that the rules that the Rambam provides allow for different solutions. You don't necessarily get 12 of one kind, you get 6 or 1 or 3 or 4. And so to get 613 is a very delicate balancing act and not really compelling. The truth is, it's not compelling. In the end, you will find variations, and it could have been 590, and it could have been 650, and that count would have actually been able to fit into the methodological rules. So it's not so compelling, and we know Rambam is a very intelligent man, doesn't need me to tell him it's not compelling. Obviously, he knew himself it wasn't compelling. He didn't fool himself. Third problem as a reader. The binary system is inadequate. The Rambam has this whole all the mitzvahs of the Torah as assays and los assays, positive and negative. But not everything fits that. It's inadequate. Some of the mitzvot asay, for example, are the laws of mitzvah. Those are not mitzvot asay the way we understand a mitzvah asay. Those are not mitzvot that you have to do something. These are just rules or mitzvot or laws that govern the person who has mitzvah. Or, for instance, the Rambam will say that a mitzvah say is the giving. Well, there's no mitzvah giving a divorce. I hope that that's not a mitzvah. Right? So what it is a procedure. It's a mitzvah in the sense that this is what the Torah tells us the procedure should be. In the conventional sense, they are not mitzvot asay, the way we understand it conventionally. They're not obligations on our part. So, actually, the Rambam could have used a better system, a better category, and that category was used by the Geonim. The Geonim, some of the Geonim used a 4-part system. Mitzvot asay, los asay, parashiot, and onshim. It's in 4 parts, and some of that is a little bit more flexible to accommodate what we're talking about. There is a parsha off. These parshas don't necessarily mean that there are things you have to do. So it would have been a little bit more flexible. He doesn't use it. He doesn't want to use it. In fact, he says that they mixed them up and they're mixed up and they don't understand what they're doing. Maybe, but there was another account available and there was another system available, and he didn't want to use that system. Which is why. Number 4, his predecessors, the Rambam's predecessors, the people who shared a lot of his thinking, his rationalist thinking, people like Ibn Ezra. So, by the way, there's a whole question whether Rambam saw Ibn Ezra's writings. Probably not, but there's a number of scholars who have made the argument that he did see it. Rav Perla, in his Sefer, shows that the Rambam actually followed some of the rules that Ibn Ezra put out in one of his stories. But it's probably not. So, but at any rate, his thinking is similar. Or, for example, you may not know this name, but Yehuda ibn Miller. Yehuda ibn Miller was a very, very major exegete, and Rambam has high regards for him. In his Truth and Resurrection, the Rambam mentions him with very high esteem. He thinks of him very highly. Yehuda ibn Miller, Shmuel ben Chofni, a Golan, one that Rambam quotes too, and probably with approbation. So there were great scholars before the Rambam who were rationalists, and yet all 3, and maybe more of them, said that the 613 is just an approximation. It's not a real number. It's maybe around there, but it's not something that we have to worry about being precise. So now the question is, Rambam follows more or less this tradition of rationalism. Why does he get so attached to a medrash? And if you think about it, a medrash is very authentic. I mean, it's a medrash that talks about 248 organs and 365 days and what they do to you. Like, what's going on here? Why is he doing this? So that was my problem. That's what the first half of the book starts with, that problematic. And again, he needed a list, he needed an outline. He finally did that list, he did the outline. The outline is useful, but it's incomplete, and it has some criteria problems. But now the question is, why did he choose Rav Simlai's Agada? So, and here what I want to do here, before I answer, because you're going to think that maybe this is crazy, so before I answer, I want to read you something. Pay particular attention just to the end. So if you want to sleep for about a minute, you could. But just to the end, very, very important. This comes from the Pirsha Mishnayos. So this comes from a real rabbinic work. This is not a philosophy. This is not a work of philosophy. This is rabbinic. Right? The commentary on the Mishnah. At the end, the last Mishnah, you can check it when you go home, the last Mishnah in Brachos. And this is his comment. And he took excerpts, because otherwise it was too long. In discussing matters of the world to come and of reward and punishment, Maimonides explains that these matters are very profound and asks the reader not to ask him of anything beyond the plain meaning of words. Quote, since on these matters there are many contradictions in the scriptural verses as well as in the dicta of the sages. But the main point is that God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked, and all this is carried out with justice. And no man can fathom this justice. All those who study these matters from among our people came up wanting. And if you thought to see among the religious theologians these forces that look like demonstrations, this is certainly not so. And we would end up coming up to what I said to you before, except that we would have wasted, he hates to waste, many words and compositions. But on this matter, the words of the philosophers, trained in the ways of philosophy, are very wondrous and very profound, needing many introductions and constant training in such studies. A wise man would understand these matters and would harmonize the philosopher's message with the scriptural statement. Behold, I have given to you today life and good. That the Poskim word. Word for word, he says, they will be able to harmonize it. And would draw from their words much of what I have told you with regards to this principle, i.e. reward and punishment, of perhaps a bit deeper and of even finer insight. We will have more to say on this matter in Tractate Ovos, where it will be shown to you the resemblance of the thoughts of the great philosophers to those of the sages in all matters. This is not the proper place to discuss this matter. Now listen carefully, now it's time to wake up. Except that on every occasion where there is some allusion to matters of belief, it is my custom to engage in some explanation, because it is important for me to explain the foundation of foundations of belief more than anything else that I teach. More than anything else that I teach. Right? Foundations of belief. So, here you have it in a rabbinic work, Rambam telling you that belief, dogma, is to him the most important thing of all. So now let's come back now to the question that I asked at the beginning of the book, which is this list. Why was this list introduced? Why this forced kind of work? And so I suggest here, and it's a suggestion, that if you recall Rav Simloi, and especially Rav Nuna, what did they say? They said that there are 611 mitzvot, and there's 2 that they heard directly from God. Which 2 did they hear directly from God? Anochi and Lo Yelcho. So in other words, there's 2 mitzvot. The belief in the existence of God, that's the way he reads it, and we may discuss that. The belief in the existence of God and His unity, those are the 2 mitzvot that were given directly to the people. Here you have, for the first time ever, a source for Rambam's introduction of dogma into the mitzvahs. Right? Interestingly, none of the other counts, none of the other enumerations counted these mitzvahs. For them, the existence of God was presupposed. There is a commander. There's somebody who commands the mitzvahs. Obviously, there must be a God. Right? Obviously, there must be a God. Well, that's not what Rambam wants. Rambam wants you to think about it, to know it, to have certainty that He exists. Right? So here is a way for him to introduce these 2 ideas. They're so fundamental to him, these ideas, they're so fundamental, that he begins the Mishnah Torah, the code of law, with those words, right? Yesod HaYesodos, what is it?
Amud HaChochma.
Sheyesh Shom? Sheyesh Shom what?
Later.
Later. You have to know. You have to know that there is a God. So, clearly, this was important to him. He had to start to code with those mitzvahs. And the only way to do that was to appropriate this medrash. And therefore he did something that didn't seem on the surface to be so logical, but now we think, I suggest, that it is logical. That's what he needed, right? So, end of the first part. End of the first part of the book. By now you have a headache, by now you think I'm crazy, but that's the end of the first part. In the second part of the book, I deal with something that's tangentially related, which is what? How did the Rambam actually describe the mitzvot in the Torah? I didn't deal with the mitzvot Taseh, and I write why I didn't. But I deal with the mitzvot Taseh. How did the Rambam describe them? How did he designate them? And how compatible is it with what he did before? And I found that most of the mitzvot Taseh are introduced with a formula, and the formula is X, Y, Z is a mitzvah Aseh. X, Y, Z is a mitzvah Aseh. For example, it's mitzvah Aseh to blow the shofar. Right? That's the formula. That's how it starts. It's bold, unequivocal, right in front of you. It begins every single one of the big mitzvot. And yet, we find, I think it was 109 places where one would have expected him to say that, because they are listed in the Sefer Mitzvot, they're listed in the Mitzvot, and he doesn't say that. So, the first thing is, why? A lot of these can be actually answered, and answered with one answer, because I don't like 80 answers. I like one answer to take care of most of them. And the answer is that Rambam changes criteria. Whereas if you remember the Sefer Mitzvot, we call them mitzvot, say even a law or procedure. In the Mishnah Torah, it seems to go back to the more conventional way of looking. So a mitzvah is an obligation, right? So of course there's no obligation of Gittin. Of course there's no obligation of Mitzorah. Of course there's no obligation of countless other contingent mitzvahs. So that already narrows down the problem, and we're down to maybe 25 to 30 mitzvahs that do not have an answer like that. So I've gotten rid of 75, 80%, but I still have a whole bunch of them that didn't. And that's what I did within the second half of the book, and that gets a little controversial. And that I'm not sure that Rabbi Grabka wants me to talk about, but it gets a little controversial. And let me explain something before I do that. Rambam is the only one that deals with a lot of care and a lot of thought and a lot of creativity in one area which he calls the difference between a rabbinic and a biblical law. Rambam says that biblical laws are laws that you can actually see and derive directly by looking and reading the pasuk. You see the pasuk tells you to do that? That's biblical law. Laws that are derived by way of hermeneutics or hermeneutical rules, what we call them the Maimonides, or even that are inferred from the text, he says those are not biblical laws, right? And by the way, not most everybody doesn't agree with him, but that's what he holds. That is his. And I don't want to go into it a lot. I discuss in the book, but the Rambam comes from a tradition of Pshuta Shel Mikro, and it's a complicated issue. Why he did this? I don't want to go into it now. But at any rate, what is not a biblical law is a divrei sofrim, is a quote, maybe according to Ramban, what Rambam meant, divrei sofrim means a rabbinical law. I don't want to get into the question, and I write that, I don't want to go into the question of what the force, the halachic force of a rabbinic law is. Okay, there's a difference between calling something a rabbinic law and what the force is. Is it a biblical force or is it non-biblical force? And that's a different issue altogether. I don't take issue. There's a book, I think that was one of the books I quoted in the bibliography of Neubauer, that has, I think, 100 different versions of what Rambam meant with divrei sofrim. So I'm not getting into that. But those 25 to 30 mitzvot that do not have the designation mitzvot aseh are special. And the question is, what is special about them? And I'm suggesting the following. There's two types. One type uses a participle, a Hebrew word for, like for instance, you say, in Kriya Shema you say, Koren Kriya Shema. They read, or they say, or we read, right? That participle is used a lot in the Mishnah. And it's used in the Mishnah for what's correct practice. What's correct practice? It's not a law. It's not an obligation, maybe, in the Mishnah. It could be an obligation, but maybe the Mishnah people did not want to interfere with the biblical law yet, so they use the participle. That's what is done, right? That's what's done. So the participle is used, for example, the Rambam uses, surprisingly, when it comes to tefillin. He doesn't say there's a mitzvah say to put on tefillin. He doesn't say that. He says manichim when it comes to the tefillin shel rosh, and he says koshri, you tie when it comes to the tefillin shel yad. He never called it a mitzvah say, and that's pretty strange. And then I go into understanding why that is happening. What's the problem? Why did the Rambam not see that in the text? Right? And that shouldn't surprise you, because they are already before Shem, like the Rashbam, that will say that maybe it is a metaphor, maybe maybe those words in the Torah don't mean necessarily the actual concrete act and the actual boxes that we have, and maybe it means a metaphor for having something in your mind and carrying it with you all the time, and so on and so forth. But there are other Mepharshim who do that too. Yet, it's possible that that's the reason why he doesn't see it clearly in the pasuk, and therefore he may have said, this is correct practice, this is maybe the sofer. Of course it's obligatory. Of course that's part of the halacha today. But does it have the force of a biblical law? That's the question. And we have the same thing happening with Shema, with Kriya Shema. And it's interesting, by the way, you should know that in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Rambam has 2 mitzvahs for Kriya Shema. Really, 2. One of them is reading it. But the other one is cognizing the unity of God. It's 2. So cognizing the unity of God, lo yirachol lo yivacherim, that is the biblical law. Korean, when the Rambam deals with Korean Kriya Shema, he's not necessarily, or he's ambivalent, or he's not sure whether that is really part of the derisive. By the way, the Gemara has a whole question whether Kriya Shema is derisive or not. There's a question in Gemara, in Brachas. So that should surprise you, but there you see the way that I was trying to infer from the use of his language, his nuances. That's one part, and that answers about half of the leftover. And the other half, I answered a little differently, and that has to do with the use of the word. Rambam uses, in the other places, he uses the word mitzvah. Stand alone, mitzvah, just mitzvah. He doesn't say mitzvah, he says mitzvah. What is mitzvah? Well, we all know that we always say, oh, such a nice mitzvah, you did such a nice mitzvah. Mitzvah really means you did a nice commendable act. You did something very nice. It's a very nice thing that you did. Right? It's either recommended, or it's nice, or it's whatever you call it, it's not obligatory. And in a number of the other places where the Rambam says mitzvah, he will say mitzvah. And those apply to, for example, the extraordinary mitzvahs of Ahavas Hashem, which really is a derivative of knowing God, right? I mean, Ahavas Hashem, the love of God, is if you know the existence of God and you get deeper into it, and you use science, and you begin to understand a little bit, and you now have this fascination with God, then you reach Ahavas Hashem. So Ahavas Hashem is really a sort of a stage, a higher stage in the knowing of God. And that's recommended. It's mitzvah. It's mitzvah. It's not obligatory. Not everybody can do that. Right? Same thing with Yiras Hashem, the fear of God. Not everybody can do that. The same thing with Leidamos. Leidamos means imitat today, which is to be like God. To be like God, not an easy thing to do. And so you can't demand those kind of things. And they're not imperatives. You cannot demand those things of people. Those are levels that you reach after a certain amount of work and training, etc., etc. That's basically the book. If you want to know more and want to know the details, you have to get it. There's not enough time to cover all the topics. So I guess that's it.